Darren walked into the workshop with a deliberate swagger, thunderstrikes slung over his shoulder and a smirk tugging at his lips. The air was thick with the hum of activity as team members moved between stations. Tools clinked, low conversations buzzed, and the pack was doing what they did best, preparing for the next fight. But when they saw Darren walk in with that look, everyone stopped what they were doing. "All right, folks," Darren called out, his voice carrying across the room. "Drop what you're doing and meet me in the war room. We've got some things to discuss, and trust me, you're going to want to hear this." The team exchanged glances before setting down their tasks and filing toward the war room. Eliana and Mylorion, who had been observing from a corner, followed quietly, their expressions curious but reserved. The war room was full, the team seated around the large table while Darren stood at its head, leaning casually against the edge. Gunnar sat to his left, his sharp gaze fixed on Darren while Clora, Eli, Ashley, Dizera, Jewel, Shade, and Karina filled the other seats. Aliena and Maelorian stood off to the side, observing with quiet intensity. "All right," Darren began, resting his hands on the table. "So, I just got back from a lovely little chat with Rose. She's as charming as ever, but she's also spooked. And when someone like Rose is spooked, you know it's serious." "Get to the point, Darren," Gunnar said, his voice low but commanding. Darren held up a hand. "Relax, boss. I'm getting there. So, here's the thing. Rose thinks Ravina isn't just another supernatural with a god complex. She's claiming Ravina is an actual demigod. As in, Loki's kid." The room fell silent. Eli raised an eyebrow, her expression skeptical. "A demigod? Really? That's a stretch, even for Rose." "My thoughts exactly," Darren said, pointing at her. "I mean, Loki. Isn't he supposed to be off causing mischief in some other realm or whatever?" Eliana stepped forward, her presence immediately commanding attention. "Loki is not a myth, nor are his descendants. If Ravina is truly his daughter, that makes her a formidable adversary. Demigods operate on a level of power that far exceeds most supernaturals." "And you believe Rose?" Clora asked, her tone cautious but curious. Eliana nodded. "Rose has her own motivations, but she's not foolish. If she says Ravina is a demigod, it warrants serious consideration." Maelorian, who had remained silent until now, stepped forward. If Ravina is indeed Loki's progeny, her connection to chaos is not merely symbolic. It's intrinsic. She would thrive in disorder, drawing strength from it. This aligns with the behavior you've observed. Karina leaned forward, her violet eyes narrowing. If Ravina's behind the drug and she's testing us, then what's her endgame? Chaos, for the sake of chaos? "Maybe," Gunnar said, his tone measured. "Or maybe she's building something bigger, a power base. If she's creating an army with that drug, it's not just about testing us, it's about control." "She's already made moves against Rose," Darren added. "And that bracelet Rose wears? She hates it, but she's convinced Ravina sees it as a leash. Ravina's testing everyone, her enemies, her allies, and anyone in between." Eli tapped her fingers on the table, her expression thoughtful. "If Rose is right, and Ravina's targeting the desperate and the weak with the drug, we need to get ahead of this. Figure out where she's producing it, who's distributing it, and shut it down." "That's easier said than done," Ashley said. "The fight at the warehouse showed us she's not just relying on drugged-up supernaturals. She's got strategy, resources, and who knows how many followers." Dizera nodded. "And she's testing us. That means she's watching us. Every move we make could be feeding her plan." Gunnar stood, the room falling silent as his presence filled the space. "We take this one step at a time. Eli, you and Eliana work on analysing what's left of the drug samples. Find out everything you can. Clora, Dizera, Ashley, dig into the warehouse leads. I want to know who's moving this stuff and where." He turned to Darren. "You're our connection to Rose. Keep her talking. If she knows more, I want to hear it." Darren smirked, saluting mockingly. "Yes, sir." Finally, Gunner's gaze settled on Mylorion. You've seen what we're up against. Any insights you can offer would be appreciated. Maelorion inclined his head. I will assist where I can. But know this. If Ravina is indeed what Rose claims, she will not fall easily. You must prepare for a long and grueling battle. The tension in the room was thick as the team absorbed their orders. Gunner's voice cut through the silence one last time. We've been through hell before, and we've come out stronger. This time won't be any different. We stay sharp, we stay united, and we take the fight to her. The pack nodded in unison, their resolve clear. As the team began to disperse, Darren leaned toward Eli with a smirk. Keebler, you think we should tell Rose to send a thank you note to Loki, family connections and all? Eli rolled her eyes, shoving him lightly. Focus, Darren. As the war room emptied, Gunner lingered by the table, his gaze distant. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they formed was anything but clear. And somewhere, in the shadows, Ravina was watching and waiting. The war room fell into an uneasy silence as the team began to disperse. Gunner remained rooted in place, his hands gripping the edge of the table, his gaze fixed on a distant point. The weight of what they were facing hung heavy in the air. Eliana stepped closer, her ethereal presence grounding, yet filled with unspoken concern. Maelorion followed, his expression as unreadable as ever, though his sharp blue eyes betrayed a flicker of thoughtfulness. Gunner finally broke the silence, his voice low and laced with frustration. How do we fight a demigod? The question hung in the air, heavy and rhetorical, yet it demanded an answer. Eliana placed a gentle hand on the table, her fingers tracing the edge of the wood as if grounding herself. Demigods are not invincible, Gunner, she said softly. They are powerful, yes, formidable in ways that few mortals can comprehend, but they are not omnipotent. Their strength often lies in their aura of invulnerability, the fear they inspire. Gunner's piercing blue eye turned to her, the frustration in his gaze melting into something more vulnerable. Fear's a hell of a weapon, Eliana. It makes people second-guess, hesitate. We can't afford hesitation, not with everything at stake. No, she agreed, her voice steady. Which is why we must understand her weaknesses. Ravina's power may come from her lineage, but her plans, her ambitions, those are rooted in something tangible. If she's creating an army, it's because she needs one. That tells us she isn't untouchable. Maelorion, who had remained silent, now stepped forward. His hands were clasped behind his back, his bearing one of quiet authority. A demigod's strength is often matched by their hubris. They see themselves as untouchable, above reproach. It is their pride that blinds them, leaves them vulnerable. Gunner snorted, a bitter edge to his voice. Great! So we just outsmart a millennia-old demigod with daddy issues? Sounds simple. A faint smile tugged at Mylorion's lips, a rare break in his usually stoic demeanor. Not simple, no, but possible. If Ravina is indeed Loki's daughter, then her chaos is not without purpose. She thrives on disorder, but disorder can be predicted if one knows where to look. And do you? Gunner asked, his tone skeptical but not dismissive. Mylorion inclined his head. I have spent my existence watching the patterns of gods and mortals alike. Chaos may be unpredictable, but it is not without rules. Ravina's endgame will reveal itself, given time. Our task is to be prepared when it does. Gunner straightened, crossing his arms over his broad chest. He looked between the two elves, his gaze hardening into something resolute. All right, then we prepare. Eliana, you and Eli focus on the drug and anything magical that can give us an edge. Maelorion, I need you to help Clara and Shade dig deeper into Ravina's motives. If there's a pattern to her chaos, I want to know it. And you? Eliana asked, her voice softer now. I'm going to focus on the team, Gunner said firmly. We've faced gods, monsters, and everything in between. A demigod's no different. We just need to figure out how to hit her where it hurts. Eliana's lips curved into a faint smile, pride glimmering in her violet eyes. You may not realize it, Gunnar, but you've already begun to dismantle her aura of invulnerability. She's testing you because she fears what you're capable of. Gunnar let out a dry chuckle, shaking his head. Yeah, well, let's hope she keeps underestimating us. That might be the only edge we've got. As the trio stood in the quiet war room, the faint hum of activity from the rest of the workshop reached them. Gunnar looked at Eliana and Maelorian, his gaze steady. We'll take this one step at a time. But if either of you has any ideas on how to actually put a demigod down, now's the time to speak up. Eliana placed a hand on his arm, her touch light but grounding. We'll find a way. Together. Maelorian nodded, his expression thoughtful. Mortals have accomplished the impossible before. I suspect you will again. Gunnar exhaled, nodding as he straightened. All right then, let's get to work. The faint bars of activity in the workshop hummed like white noise in the background as Gunnar leaned against his desk, arms crossed, his cybernetic fingers tapping rhythmically against his bicep. The intensity in his single blue eye betrayed the weight of his thoughts. Moments later, Shade and Karina entered the office. Shade moved with the silent grace of a shadow, his expression neutral but alert. Karina followed, her presence radiating quiet strength, though a flicker of curiosity shone in her violet eyes. You called, boss? Shade asked, his voice as smooth and measured as always. Gunnar nodded, gesturing for them to close the door. Once it clicked shut, he motioned for them to take the 2 chairs in front of his desk. He didn't sit, choosing instead to remain standing, a deliberate move that underscored the seriousness of what he was about to say. Shade, Gunnar began, his tone low and steady. When we first crossed paths, you were working as an informant for Sophia. You had a network, contacts, ears in places most people wouldn't dare step into. Shade inclined his head slightly. That was a long time ago. The network's gone quiet. Quiet, Gunnar echoed, but not gone. Karina glanced at Shade, her brows knitting together. What's this about, Gunnar? It's about Ravina, Gunnar said, his piercing gaze locking onto Shade's. If Rose is right, and she usually is, then Ravina's playing a game we can't afford to lose. She's building an army, testing boundaries, and from what we've seen, her reach is growing. We need intel, and you're the best chance we've got of getting it. Shade leaned back in his chair, his sharp eyes narrowing. You're asking me to dig up something on Ravina? A demigod? You do realize the kind of heat that could bring down? I do, Gunnar said without hesitation. And I also know that if we don't get ahead of her, that heat's going to burn us all alive. Karina frowned, leaning forward. Shade, is it possible? Do you still have connections? Shade's lips twitched into something resembling a smirk, though it didn't reach his eyes. Possible. Sure. Easy. Not by a long shot. Most of my old network's either dead, hiding, or in someone else's pocket. But if you're asking if I can still work the shadows, I can. That's all I need to hear, Gunnar said. I'm not expecting miracles, Shade, just a foothold. Find out who's working with her, where her operations are based, anything that gives us an edge. Karina's expression darkened, her gaze shifting between Shade and Gunnar. This could put him in serious danger. If Ravina finds out... She won't, Shade interrupted, his voice calm but firm. This isn't my first dance, Princess. I know how to cover my tracks. Karina's jaw tightened, but she nodded, her trust in Shade evident despite her concerns. Gunnar straightened, his tone softening slightly. I wouldn't ask this if it wasn't important, but if you've got a better idea, I'm all ears. Karina shook her head. No, I just... Be careful, Shade. Shade glanced at her, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face. Always. Gunnar stepped closer, his cybernetic fingers flexing absently at his side. Start small. Feel out the old contacts. Don't stir up trouble unless you have to. And if you find anything we can use, you come straight to me. Shade nodded, rising from his chair with a fluid motion. Understood. I'll start tonight. Karina stood as well, her violet eyes meeting Gunner's. What about me? What do you need from me? Gunner's gaze softened, though his tone remained firm. Stay close to Shade. Watch his back, but let him do the talking. And if anything feels off, you pull out. Got it? Got it, she said, her determination clear. As they moved toward the door, Gunner called out, Shade. The former informant turned, his hand resting lightly on the doorknob. Yeah? Thank you, Gunner said simply. The words carried weight, an unspoken acknowledgement of the risk Shade was taking. Shade nodded once, a flicker of respect passing through his otherwise guarded expression. We've all got our roles to play, boss. This one just happens to be mine. As the door closed behind them, Gunner exhaled, his gaze drifting to the map pinned on the wall, a web of pins and strings marking known activity. The game was shifting, and every move mattered. Shade's message arrived in Gunner's private comm channel, its encrypted signature unmistakable. Gunner was in his office, the map of recent activities sprawled across the table, his cybernetic fingers tracing potential connections when the alert chimed. He accessed the message immediately, the weight of the unknown coiling in his gut. Location acquired, Black Dawn Safe House. Coordinates, encrypted data. Details, minimal security on the surface. Expect heavy resistance, possible high-value targets on site. Proceed with caution. Gunner read the message twice, then stood and slammed his fist into the comm panel, opening an emergency channel to the team. All Echo Division members, report to the war room immediately. We've got a lead on a Black Dawn safe house, and we're moving now. The team assembled with practiced efficiency, tension and anticipation thick in the air. Eliana and Mylorion stood quietly to one side, observing the team as they filed in. Clara and Omega were the first to arrive, their presence calm but ready. Darren sauntered in, his usual smirk replaced by a grim resolve, with thunderstrikes slung across his back. Ashley and Desera followed, their tactical gear already in place, while Eli trailed behind, a tablet glowing in her hands as she accessed Shade's intel. Gunner's voice cut through the noise as he addressed the team. Shade found a Black Dawn safe house. The intel points to potential high-value targets and key operational data. This isn't a scouting mission. We're hitting them hard and fast. He turned to Eli. Pull up the schematics and give us a layout. Eli nodded, projecting the data from her tablet onto the wall screen. The blueprint of an unassuming industrial complex filled the room, complete with potential entry points, structural vulnerabilities, and likely ambush zones. It's set up to look abandoned, but there's a reinforced basement here. She pointed to the screen. That's where they'll likely keep anything worth protecting. Gunner turned to Clara. You, Omega, and Ashley are on perimeter detail. Make sure no one slips out while we're inside. Got it, Clara said, her tone crisp as Omega sat at her side, ears perked. Desera, Gunner continued, find a vantage point. We'll need your rifle covering us from above. Already planning my shot, Desera said with a faint smirk, checking her gear. Darren, you're with Eli and me. We'll breach the basement and retrieve any intel. Happy to tag along, Darren said, his smirk returning briefly. Let's just hope they're not expecting a party. Shade and Karina are already on recon, Gunner said. They'll meet us on site and provide us with any last-minute updates. He glanced at Eliana and Melorion. You two will be our ace in the hole. Stay with the breaching team. If things get dicey, your magic might be the edge we need. Melorion inclined his head, his calm voice breaking the tension. Consider us ready. Gunner's gaze swept across the room, meeting the eyes of each team member. We've faced worse than these bastards, but don't underestimate them. The Black Dawn doesn't fight fair, and neither will we. This is a strike to remind them who they're dealing with. We hit fast, we hit hard, and we get out clean. The team nodded, their resolve clear. As they dispersed to gear up, Gunnar lingered by the map, his thoughts turning briefly to Shade. "Don't screw this up out there," he muttered to himself, his fingers brushing Starbreaker's stock. The rifle felt solid, a reminder of the battles he'd survived and the ones yet to come. The workshop buzzed with focused energy as Echo Division prepared to move out. Gunnar's orders were swift and clear, each member of the team falling into their assigned roles with practiced precision. In the medbay, Jewel double-checked her gear, her expression calm but serious. Bianca, seated at a console beside her, adjusted the controls for the surveillance drone, her sharp eyes scanning the live feeds. "We'll be ready to patch them up if it comes to that," Jewel said, her tone measured but firm. Bianca nodded, her fingers dancing over the controls. "I'll keep an eye on the sky. If anything unexpected comes their way, we'll see it first." Final preparations. In the motor pool, the team loaded up their gear. 2 black tactical Suburbans gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights, their interiors packed with weapons and supplies. Gunnar stood by the lead vehicle, his cybernetic arm flexing absently as he surveyed the group. "Darren," Gunnar said, turning to him. "Contact the local PD. Let them know we're running an op in their backyard. Tell them to hold the perimeter until we've cleared the site." Darren nodded, already pulling out his phone. "On it. Let's hope they play nice this time." As Darren stepped aside, Eli finished loading a case of enchanted ammunition into the back of the vehicle. "Drones calibrated," she said to Bianca, who gave her a thumbs up from the console. Clara, adjusting the straps on her tactical gear, approached Gunnar. "Perimeter's covered as soon as we roll in. Omega's itching for action." Gunnar gave her a sharp nod. "Good. Let's keep it tight." The convoy moved swiftly through the night, the rumble of engines blending into the distant hum of city noise. When they arrived at the industrial complex, Shade and Karina were already waiting near a dimly lit side street. The 2 figures emerged from the shadows as the vehicles pulled to a stop. Shade leaned against a rusted lamppost, his sharp gaze scanning the area. "Took you long enough," he said, his tone dry. Karina stepped forward, her violet eyes gleaming in the faint light. "We've scouted the site. They're on edge, but they don't know you're coming." Gunnar stepped out of the Suburban, Starbreaker slung across his back. "What's the layout?" Shade pulled out a compact tablet and handed it to Eli. 4 guards outside. Minimal activity in the upper levels. All the action is happening below ground, probably where they're keeping the high-value stuff." Karina added, "The basement has at least 2 dozen inside. Armed, but not heavily. They're relying on numbers, not firepower." Gunnar turned to the team as they assembled in a tight semicircle. "All right, here's the plan. Clara, Ashley, and Omega secure the perimeter and keep anyone from slipping out. Dezera, find your vantage point and cover us." Dezera gave a curt nod, already scanning the nearby rooftops for the perfect spot. "Shade, Karina, you're with me, Eli, and Darren. We breach the basement, secure the intel, and get out. Ileana, Mylorion, keep us covered. If things go sideways, we're going to need your magic." "Understood," Mylorion said, his calm voice cutting through the tension. "Jewel, Bianca," Gunnar continued, addressing the medics over comms. "You're standing by for extraction. Bianca, keep that drone running. If there's any movement we don't see, call it out." "Got it," Bianca replied, her voice steady. The team split up, moving silently into their assigned positions. Ashley and Clara melted into the shadows with Omega at their side, while Dezera climbed to a nearby rooftop, her sniper rifle gleaming under the faint moonlight. Inside the complex, Shade led the way, his steps silent as he guided the breach team toward the basement. Eli followed close behind, her tablet tracking the signals of the guards' movements. Gunnar and Darren brought up the rear, their weapons at the ready. As they approached the main entry point, Shade held up a hand, signaling for them to stop. "2 guards, right around the corner," he whispered. Gunnar nodded, his cybernetic arm flexing as he signaled to Karina. She moved ahead, her katana gleaming faintly as she slipped into the shadows. Moments later, the muffled sound of bodies hitting the ground signaled her success. "We're clear," she said softly. In the med van, Jewel monitored the team's vitals on her console, her brow furrowing slightly. "They're in position," she said to Bianca, who was glued to the drone's live feed. "Still no surprises," Bianca replied. "But let's not jinx it." Back at the perimeter, Ashley's comm crackled. "Movement," DeSara said from her rooftop perch. "Looks like reinforcements heading in from the north. 4 bogies." "I see them," Ashley replied, signaling to Clara. "We've got this." In the basement, the air was heavy with tension as Gunnar and his team approached the reinforced door. Eli worked quickly, placing a small rune-etched device against the lock. "This should disable their wards," she whispered, her fingers moving deftly. The device hummed softly before the lock clicked open. Gunnar pushed the door open, his team flooding into the room beyond. The dimly lit space was packed with crates, glowing faintly with the telltale aura of enchanted items. At the far end, a group of armed individuals turned, their surprise quickly morphing into aggression. "Contact!" Gunnar barked, raising Starbreaker as the first shots rang out.
All right, you've made it this far. That means either you like what you're seeing, or you're lost. Either way, no harm in sticking around, right? Go on, hit that subscribe button, join the team, and while you're at it, hit like, because, let's be honest, you're already invested. And the bell? That's for you if you don't want to miss any of the action. You wouldn't want me to come find you. See you soon, and remember, once you're in, you're family.